Welcome to the Inner Work Community Podcast, which aims to provide you with language, tools, and guidance in your journey towards personal and relational wholeness. We'll discuss topics ranging from psychology, spirituality, tantra, leadership, sexuality, polyamory, and more. My name is Michael, and I'll be your host for insightful interviews with thought leaders, practitioners, and experts who have a thing or two to share about living an integrated and meaning-making life. Whether you're looking to deepen your connection with your interior world, overcome challenges in your relationships, or expand your psychosomatic horizons with fresh perspectives and paradigms, the Inner Work Community Podcast offers a safe yet challenging space for dialogue and introspection. This is all a gift, so let's go enjoy it together. Well, welcome to the Inner Work Community Podcast, and I'm so excited to have Keila, Shaheen here and have this wonderful conversation around a few topics that I think both of us are very passionate about. I'm going to introduce myself, and then Keila will introduce herself, and we're going to dive right in. You know, there's a couple ways to enter the water. You can kind of wade in, or you can just jump, you can cannonball, and I think we might just cannonball into this. So my name is Michael Simmons. I have my doctorate in leadership with an emphasis on Jungian psychology and Christian spirituality. I'm, I would say, a psycho-spiritual entrepreneur. I really just love inviting people into spaces, paradigms, offering language and experience that really helps make life meaningful, brings about healing and wholeness. And I am located just south of Portland, Oregon, but literally in the next week, I'm moving into the heart of Portland. So I'm absolutely delighted to be here and to have this conversation.
Thank you for that, Michael.
Yeah.
I'm so excited to be here and just dive into a conversation that has shaped not only my career, but my personal journey as well. And the topic of shadow work is something that I think connects us all, even if we don't realize it yet. So I think this dialogue will uncover some powerful truths for listeners. But a little bit about myself. I'm Keila Shaheen. I'm the founder of the Zenful app. It's an app for inner work and emotional awareness. And I'm also the creator of the Shadow Work Journal, which you might be familiar with online. And my journey into this space of self-inquiries started even before coming across the practice of shadow work. I grew up in a very spiritual home. I was raised in a Catholic household, and I'm sure that my interest in psychology and self-awareness comes out of that background. But my curiosity of the self and the soul and just of our dualistic nature has grown immensely outside any bounds of dogma since early on. And in college, I decided to dive in and began dedicating time to explore the self in the realm of self-help and spirituality to help navigate and discern in times of adversity and pain and loneliness. So it's been a deeply personal journey, but it's been beautiful and has led me on this path to open up paths for other people to find themselves, find their way back to themselves. So yeah, I'm really excited about this conversation. Michael reached out a couple of months ago, and we've been connected since then. And, you know, you just have such a talent to bring an organic space where conversations flow and insights just occur. So this will be really beautiful. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you, Keila. Wow. I think with this conversation being centered around shadow work, and then we're talking about within that emotions and this kind of esoteric concept of inner gold. But before we get to the emotions and the inner gold, let's talk a little bit about shadow work, and maybe even before shadow work, what is shadow? Like, let's maybe bounce that around a little bit. For you, Keila, like, how do you define shadow? What is it? Maybe both definitionally and in terms of your experience.
Shadow work, I don't think is just psychological. It's deeply human. And it's the part of us that we hide but yearn to understand. Sometimes unknowingly, sometimes with awareness. And the shadow is I mean, it's like we're a whole world, and the shadow is the vast unknown of the ocean. And there's a whole ocean of hidden golds and trinkets and treasures that we can dive into. You know, we might have to hold our breaths. It might feel like there's pressure around us. But, you know, when we open our eyes and swim through the unknown, we can find so much, and it's infinite, it's never ending. Shadow work is a lifelong process, and the shadow will always be there. It's a natural part of who we are as human beings. We're multitudes, and the shadow is just one aspect of, or multiple aspects of our multitudes.
Yeah. I'm glad that you bring it around to this, the idea that shadow is going to always be there, right? Because one of the misconceptions I run into a lot when I have clients, meet one-on-one or in workshops is that, oh, there's going to be this point where I can like empty out my shadow, right? My shadow will disappear, there'll be enough light that illuminates all of these hidden places. But the reality is shadow is like an organ. In fact, I think Jung and others, Carl Jung, by the way, coined this metaphor for our personal unconscious, which we call shadow. But the reality is we don't need to empty it. We just need to be in relationship with it. It's like an organ. We don't need to know what the spleen is doing. We just need to know that we have one, and we need to know what it does and how it works. And if it's not working well, maybe we need to go get something checked out. And so treating it as something that's just inherent in us that we just simply need to be in relationship with, I think is such a vital to that inner work journey.
When you start to build a relationship with yourself, it's like dating yourself, and there will always be challenges and blind spots, and just coming into that process where you're not ignoring or hiding, and you learn how to step into the shadow and explore it. That in itself is transformational.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I like to think of there's a few metaphors that I use when it comes to shadow. And, one would be, how we think about the moon, right? The dark side of the moon, the part of the moon that we can see. And the reality is the dark side of the moon is also part of the moon. And when it comes to shadow is just the hidden part of us, right? It's still very much a part of us. It's just not, it doesn't have a relationship with our conscious personality. And so yeah, you think about with the moon, you're going to have a dark side of the moon, but there's also this rotation, right? There's this sense that it's not entirely hidden. I think the moon rotates. Actually, I'm not an astrologer. I don't actually know. Maybe it doesn't. um, but yeah, and then Robert Bly, who you may be familiar with, wrote an article called "The Long Bag We Drag Behind Us," and he talks about the shadow being this long bag that we drag around. Basically, early in life, parts of us that are responded to poorly by parents, teachers, coaches, peers, just the overall culture, those parts that are not acceptable essentially get thrown into the bag. And then he even says in the article, by the time we're 20, we're basically a thin slice of who we would have otherwise been. And so he says very poetically at the end, we spend the first half of our life putting things in the bag, and then we spend the rest of our lives trying to get them out again. Yeah, and I think what's beautiful about shadow as this metaphor for our hidden life is we can also be people that create the metaphors. Like what metaphor works for you to understand your hidden life? You'll uncover it just as you move through your day. You think about the front of the stage or the back of the stage, what we present to an audience versus what we might conceal or kind of bury away. Those are the things that we're really getting at when it comes to what shadow is. It's just simply what we repress, deny, or just fail to see or know about ourselves at all.
Yeah, yeah, definitely like the first 20 years of development, we learn how to add onto ourselves all of the roles and facades of society. And there's a misconception of like reaching your, your fullest self, your best self for the function and the place and the environment of society. And there's a lot of boundaries and barriers there. But in doing shadow work, reaching your full self, through the process of individuation, we reach for our shadows and we integrate those hidden aspects of ourselves and reach a different kind of full potential, a full expansion to contain all parts of ourselves and hold onto that with love and compassion. And so when you step into that wholeness and you can come from a place of self-understanding and awareness without judgment, without blame, and work through, the parts that may not serve us, and also hold up the hidden parts that do serve us, hidden talents, hidden golds. That's a different kind of full potential in your human being that you can reach.
In our conversations, Keila, you've brought up this idea of compassion, self-compassion, and I think it's not just, you don't just use the word. I feel that kind of radiates from you. There's a compassionate sense that you bring into just the virtual space as I've experienced you. Can you say a bit about compassion as it relates to interacting with, we'll get into shadow work in a second, but just in terms of as we approach our shadow, what's the role of compassion in that?
I'm just sitting with the word compassion. Come means with passion, coming with passion. So, yeah, I mean, it's easy to dive in, be triggered, experience the flood of emotions, and then quickly judge or put down or blame yourself for acting this way or finding other things to pinpoint and create logic out of it all. But when we come with passion to our shadows and hold space with love, then we can approach those hidden aspects with greater understanding. And I think that's one of the most important parts of this work, is to bring in the softness, because it's hard. There's a lot of hard, difficult realizations and truths that come out of this, but there's a lot of beauty in that space as well. And when we can bring in that self-love and compassion, then it hurts less, like we create the softness that holds the hardness.
Yeah. To hear compassion, I'm kind of brought to the idea of hospitality and hosting, which kind of requires shadow to be humanized. I think part of why, whether it's emotions or instincts, beliefs, things like that go into the shadow is because somehow they were likely dehumanized in us. And so we kind of unconsciously align with this idea that whatever that is, whether it's anger or fear, sadness, or even joy, right? It's not human. It's not acceptable within the human community. So it has to go into the shadow. So healing looks like compassionate hospitality, maybe with these parts of us that have really grown, malnourished in our own psyche. And so approaching them with that kind of hosting, that attitude of hosting them, I don't know. I'm really drawn to that.
Are you familiar with Rumi's The Guest House poem?
No, I don't think so.
Can I read it?
Yeah, please.
Let me find it real quick. But it's very aligned with this sense of our emotions being a guest, and we can host them, invite them in. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture, still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight, the dark thought, the shame, the malice. Meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. be grateful for whoever comes in because each has been sent as a guide from beyond.
That's beautiful.
It is. And you were just saying 10 minutes before when we were troubleshooting how you had Thanksgiving without your furniture.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. That's, I mean, we could go on and on because I think that like this kind of blows the whole conversation in a different direction, because not our conversation necessarily, but what it looks like to be whole for a lot of us probably is actually more likely to be something that is akin to perfection. So we strive to be perfect. We strive to not have any shadows. We strive to not, let any of that stuff seep out. But the reality is that like we will be visited. Sometimes those guests will be experience hospitality, just hosting them. And then other times they will be wildly annoying, wildly uncomfortable, and almost displacing, like not having a dinner table for Thanksgiving like we had. But if there can be that receptivity to what's coming into your space, it has a way of just, I don't know, realigning and rehumanizing, re-relating, right? I think that was something that we experienced for Thanksgiving. We sold our dining room table because we're moving, so the whole family, we sat down on the floor and had Thanksgiving, and there's no barrier between me and my family. And so there's something so connective about that in that moment. But it could have been very much an annoying situation, but in the end it was actually an invitation.
Yeah, it's important to invite our shadows in when we feel emotionally ready to sit with those parts of ourselves. And this is reminding me of one of the pillars that Dr. Connie incorporates in her work with her past clients on characterizing your shadows, giving them a name, and identifying when they pop up, when they show up in your life. You could have the judge or the critic, um, or the doubtful or the worrier or the drama queen, and you can start giving them the names. I mean, we're multitudes, so there's going to be a council of these almost personalities or voices that can start to yell and like take over. So characterizing humanizes the shadow, and by humanizing that in turn helps you bring compassion into the space as well, and
Mm-hmm.
work with the shadow, dance with it, not battle, ignore.
Yeah. Okay. So that brings us, I think, pretty seamlessly into the conversation around shadow work specifically. So another metaphor for shadow is a dense, dark forest. And you can't just go into a forest, be airdropped into a forest and expect to navigate or get to know it. It's be really disorienting. And shadow work kind of starts with a trailhead, right? A dense, dark forest. If you're going to enter it, you start at a trailhead, and then you walk through that, and you journey through that path. For you, Keila, you are an author. You've written the shadow work journal. I mean, this is a very practical, written but very embodied form of journaling at the same time. Like, what would be the trailhead that you personally have experienced the most, that you feel is most accessible for the people that you work with?
Yeah, I love the forest analogy. Most recently, I've been resonating with like a stage dance floor
Mm,
situation. So if life is one big stage and we have our place, we can learn how to dance with ourselves, with the people around us, with their shadows, with our own shadows. And I was going through a difficult period a couple weeks ago, and the word battle kept ringing in my head, and my inner like shadow was popping up, and I was like, it's a battle, like I have to be a warrior, and those were not empowering. They didn't feel empowering. So then I shifted that concept, and instead of a battlefield, which we can show up to life and see it as a big battlefield because there's so much commotion going on, but if we can shift our perception to instead see the chaos and all the movement as part of the art of living, then it becomes a dance. And we can move with the dips and use the dips as momentum to swing ourselves back up. And we can spin and enjoy the turns and the twists of life. So, really, like feeling that motion of shadow work and just of life in general, and seeing it as like a just pure expression. Like we're here to experience and express ourselves. And yeah, there's an artfulness to it as well. And that really helps me come to terms with like the shadow and shadow work in real life.
Yeah, yeah. I'm hearing this artistic relationality to shadow work. It's not I mean, the word work is pretty laden with, I mean, a lot of connotation around that, right? Yeah. So that it's shadow, I don't know, like there's a
Shadow
shadow,
play. Have
say
you
it
heard of
again.
shadow play?
Shadow play. Yes. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah.
That turns the shadow work into shadow play.
Yeah. Say more about that. Like just the, how that shift, like what that shift offers.
One of the big realizations I had when I first started my shadow work journey a couple of years ago was that it was hard and it was difficult to find resources online. And the shadow work journal, I created it with the idea of making it friendly and accessible for people to dive deep. So the way that the pages are structured, it's approachable. And it feels almost like play. When you sit down, you open a journal, you see the pages laid out, you see the prompts, it's clear. There's some creativity involved in there. And when we play, we become our most uninhibited selves. We also tap into the child self, which is a huge aspect of finding the roots of your shadows. And I think that really helps, like tap into your early childhood experiences and understand when you use play or art as a medium, as a method to dive into the unconscious, it kind of takes away a barrier of thought and logic and seriousness.
Yeah. Yeah. Because the if you go back to the moon metaphor, right? If shadow is the dark side of the moon, then the illuminated side of the moon is what we might call the ego or ego persona. It's basically our public facing self, who we know that we are. And we need that. We need an ego. We need a persona. I liken persona to, clothes, right? Everyone here is likely wearing clothes. If you're not, that's fine. If your camera is off. But if you are, those clothes are doing something for you, right? They're concealing what you don't want to be seen. They're also revealing what you do want to be seen, right? And my guess is you're wearing clothes that reveal a part of your personality or a sense of style, what you like. The persona is the same way. A persona is not a false self. It's just an accentuated part of who you are when it's healthy.
Yeah.
And the ego is the same. The ego is essentially who you are, like who you know that you are, and the shadow is who you don't know that you are. It's what you don't want to know. And so this work, this shadow work, if it becomes really like a grind, if it becomes like, if the ego gets a hold of it, right? The ego gets a hold of doing shadow work. Well, you'll find that you'll be just really focused on being good, right? You'll find being really focused on making sure you don't do that thing again, or I'm not going to have that slip up. I'm not going to say that again. But shadow work for me is really, or shadow play. And I love that, because what play does is it causes the ego to descend a bit. The ego descends maybe down into the unconscious, you can say. I mean, even the metaphor of that I shared earlier about eating Thanksgiving on the floor, there was a movement from going from a place of posture at a table to a place of seated on the floor, right? There's this humbling, this humanizing experience where my conscious self didn't really know what to do to eat Thanksgiving dinner on the floor. And so it invited other parts of me forward by simply descending down into that space. So, yeah, that's the relationship. So, ego is not bad. It just is also like an organ, like we said earlier about shadow. It's just a part of us. It just needs to be in relationship with its hidden side or the shadow.
Yeah, I love the groundingness, the humblingness of this kind of work. And yeah, when we approach it as play, nothing's wrong when there's no right or wrong way to play. There is just exploration and expression. And I think we could approach ourselves in the same way.
Oh, yeah, it's experimental. There's an experimental, experiential, we're just figuring it out, right? So let's maybe shift the conversation a bit into emotions specifically. For me, I found that emotional work is typically a great trailhead into shadow work because emotions are often the first things that go into the shadow. When we're kids and we're crying and we're having a meltdown. I mean, my dad said many times, stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about. And these statements that get made that then we learn if I want to get my needs met, I can't show that emotion. So they tend to be at the bottom of the bag. And so if we can start there, we tend to kind of pull a lot of other stuff up with it. So when it comes to your work and how you, maybe even within the journal, Keila, what role do emotions and work around emotions, what role does it have within shadow work?
Emotions are the colors in the palette that we experience life through. And some emotions might seem ugly or gross, or maybe you want to hide from them or you feel taken back by certain emotions, but they're an invitation. When we experience strong emotions, they're like messengers carrying insight about our inner worlds and what resides in there. But often we either ignore them or let them control us. So, yeah, I mean, emotions are huge. It's a huge part of the Zenfulno app, which is there's a check-in feature where you can check in and capture emotions because they often are the starting point that leads us to these great inner truths and realizations. They're a great starting place, just an opening of the door where we can pass through and ask ourselves hard questions around them. Like, why don't I like the experience of doubtfulness, for example? Feeling doubt. Was there any part of my past where things were uncertain and doubt overcame? And so you can follow the path that the emotion unfolds you into, and that can lead you directly towards a core wound or a complex or a memory or experience that has shaped who you are and how you go about life. So emotions are always guides, they're clues, they're messengers that can guide us towards those realizations.
Yeah, I think it's Bessel van der Kolk in the book The Body Keeps the Score makes the point that emotions, like the etymology of emotions, is to move out, right? There's this, emotions are essentially dynamic, right? They move us, they move. I mean, just to know themselves, they move. So they really are, like you said, they're the way in which we experience life. And when you say that, I mean, that's an embodied statement. Emotions are not things we think. They're things that happen in our body and are, we may then create rationale or give it words or give it a name. And that's really helpful. And at the same time, it's really about what's happening in our bodies. I've done so much work like with individuals, particularly men, who, if I say or ask the question, what are you feeling right now? And the response is, I think I feel. I think I feel fear or I think I feel anger. And just in that little statement, it's revealing that they're not able to really say that they feel something. It has to pass through their rational mind before they can say that they're feeling it. And so a lot of for the work I do is helping people just reconnect with what their body is simply experiencing without having to define it. Just feel it, locate it, and let's start to just settle into the experience that you're having right now.
The body has a way of interpreting emotions before the mind does, for sure. And
Mm-hmm.
emotion, E, is the energy in motion. So there's the energy passing, trying to pass. And it tends to stop when we try to understand it directly or immediately. I mean, everyone has their own methods that work best for them to process and do shadow work. But for myself, I definitely need to tap into my body and see where the emotion is living, if it's in my throat or in the pit of my gut, associating colors to it, associating, a texture to it. And then once you learn to identify the essence of the emotion, then you can start to pinpoint the reasons why it's there,
Yeah.
reasons why it's showing up in your experience.
The idea of giving it a color, giving it a texture. I mean, this goes along with the whole, relating to it as a character. You're very much it's a relationship. This involves a lot of imaginal,
Yeah.
access to imagination. What would you say for someone who's like, when I close my eyes and try to imagine a color or a texture, nothing comes up? What are some things that people could do in that situation to tap into their imagination?
I think continuing to build questions off of that, because maybe it doesn't have a color, maybe it's an emptiness or
Mm,
translucent or transparent. Why can't you see it? Or maybe it's hiding somewhere. Where is it hiding behind? Do you feel like it's hiding behind a door or behind your back? Like, where is it coming up from? Even like stepping outside of the emotion and trying to create the environment for it in your imagination. I think all of those outside questions can help lead you
mm,
to pinpointing the emotional essence itself.
yeah, yeah. Well, a few other things I just want to make note of around emotions, right? So talk about emotions being in our bodies. The other thing is that emotions are instinctual. They're in that realm of instinct. Don't Oftentimes people will say, "Oh, I don't get sad or I don't cry." And that might be a true statement. I don't cry, but at the same time, it's not that you don't have sadness. It's that most likely you're not in relationship with sadness, and so having or not having an emotion is not really an option. It's whether we can access them, whether we are in relationship with them. So ultimately, yeah, these emotions, and I haven't Christian evangelical world for most of my life. There are legitimate Bible verses that say not to have certain emotions, like be angry but don't sin, or equating anger with murder, or fear, right? What is it? Perfect love casts out fear, and so we like, oh, I'm afraid I must not be perfect, or I must not be loving or receiving love. So I've got to get rid of my fear. So we learn through a lot of different ways not to experience these instincts. And those instincts are there for a reason, right? Fear alerts us to danger, whether that's physical danger or emotional, psychological, spiritual danger. Um, Sets our boundaries. It's a boundary setting emotion. Sadness helps us to be connected. It's about connection. So yeah, these actually are not just emotions that we have to work through, but they're emotions that are there to guide us more deeply into our experience.
And that can also show us what our greatest values in life are, our
Mm-hmm.
greatest purposes in life are. Like
Mm-hmm.
what you fear, why do you fear those things? What do you feel like you sacrifice if you step into your fear? And what do those sacrificed values tell you about what's truly valuable in your life. So they can also like inversely help you find your place in the world.
Mhm. So finding our place in the world, finding this inner gold we've mentioned a few times. What is that for you? What is it, that we can discover, right? Because we can discover it's not the binary of like, oh, the gross stuff versus the golden stuff, but there is this sense of, yeah, it's not just the things that are unacceptable from a, like this, like, oh, that's not good. It's sometimes the things that go into shadow are the things that are almost too good, right? That are, we can't show up that way because it takes the light off of everyone. So we abdicate and we maybe shrink ourselves to not take up as much space. Maybe share a bit about what is this inner gold, this idea of the gold we can discover.
Yeah, I mean, the inner gold could represent hidden talents that we have, natural abilities that we have. For me personally, starting my shadow work led me to recover some of that inner gold that was residing inside of me. Throughout my studies, school, I was very disciplined, followed the herd, and I abandoned a lot of my passions, all of my passions. I put them aside. I felt that lack and that emptiness, but I still felt like I was doing the right thing and, um, following the path that was laid out for me. But at some point after graduating, leaving college, and right when COVID was starting, that's when I was like, what is this abyss of the real world that I just stepped into that doesn't really feel like a real world because everyone's locked up in their homes and isolated. So I did a lot of that recovering inner golds. And so in solitude, I dove back into reading and writing. Poetry was big for me when I was in middle school. So I tapped back into poetry and started learning different ways to interpret the world, which I just love to interpret the world in the arts, in the visual arts, in the literary arts, and in audible arts, music. And when I was younger, I played the flute, and there was a time where I wanted my career to be in the orchestra. And I had these aspirations when I was little that I completely forgot about and abandoned. And so, in that space of the unknown and in that realm of feeling meaninglessness and purposelessness in life, I started to rediscover my passions for the arts, for music. I picked up the flute again. I continued writing. And from there, the shadow work journal came out of that phase of rediscovery. And it's been beautiful. These things are now central parts of my life. And I don't put so much weight on them. I still see it as just a means to express and make sense of the world. And it definitely feels like hidden gold that I'm holding on to and, you know, protecting. I think that's good.
Yeah, there's a book by Robert Johnson called Inner Work or Inner Gold. And it's the subtitle is something like Understanding Psychological Projection. And when I think about inner gold, I oftentimes think about, what are the things in me that are almost too good to own, almost like they feel like either they're too good because they're too lofty, or they're too good because they're too playful or too childlike or too almost originally me, like the original, this like sense of like who I was before I was told who I can't be. And we forget those things, like you were sharing there, like they slowly move into the unconscious. And then we start to discover them, and in my experience you usually discover them first in other people, like even if it's not a clear like, oh, that person has the gift that I really want, and it's usually not like that. It's usually this drawing to someone, right? Like, I'm drawn to this person, I don't know why, but I just want to be around them. They just have something. We even say this, oh, they just have something I don't have. They have this way about them. And that isn't bad in and of itself, because what is great about it is when we can't hold the gold in ourselves and we project it onto someone else, it's an opportunity to see it in them so that we can maybe do the work of integrating it back into ourselves, of owning it in ourselves, kind of like what a mirror does, right? We can't see ourselves if we don't have something in front of us reflecting back what we look like. The same is true for a movie, right? If you try to take out, they don't do film anymore, but if you were to take out a roll of film and try to watch a movie just by stretching out the film, you're going to have no idea what lessons, what is happening in that film, who the characters are, the character development. And so that film has to be projected onto a screen. And then you watch the film, and now that story now lives inside of you, right? Every movie you've ever seen was projected onto something that you then watched and integrated. And the same is true, I think, with projection, or with gold. Our inner gold is, we oftentimes do have to see it in other people, even if it's seeing someone be so authentic. And it's this invitation to find something authentic in ourselves that perhaps we have contorted or fixed up in a way that seems more presentable and more acceptable. But that authenticity is really what we're trying to get back to.
We don't tend to admire ourselves. It feels awkward, weird, even uncomfortable if we sit in front of the mirror and state the positive affirmations and compliment ourselves or give us that phrase in the morning for motivation. For a lot of people, that feels uncomfortable at first, but it's very important to be a friend, to make amends with who you are. And so we place our admiration and project that inner gold onto others around us. And there's a reason why we feel a deep affinity towards certain people, because in that affinity, in that connection towards their essence, we're reminded of that same essence that lives within us. Maybe it's buried.
Yeah.
That is really powerful.
Yeah.
So I think one method to trying to pinpoint your inner gold is asking your close friends and family members what they see in you, what qualities do they admire in you. I think it's a great exercise to get feedback, both on the good and the seemingly negative as well, because feedback for people closest to us is really valuable. They see a lot of the things we don't.
Yes. Actually, that reminds me, just the other day, my daughter, who will be 10 in a few days, wanted to do like a personality test on everyone in the family. And that personality test would tell you what kind of animal you are. And so she was asking me these questions. And one of the questions was, how would people most likely describe you? And she listed off these answers. And I said, the one I responded with was confident. And, without even thinking, she's like, I would have said caring. And she just said it. And I literally almost melted because I don't think anyone's ever said, Michael, you're caring. I mean, I think people have maybe expressed that sentiment at some level, but to hear it said so unfiltered, I would have said caring. By my daughter, that was a moment where I received something back. Like, it was always mine, but in that moment, I think that she reflected it, right? She reflected it and I could see it. And it just landed more deeply than it ever had, that I'm caring. I'm a caring person. So yeah, shadow work isn't just, slugging through the muck and mire. It is very much this process of being hosted in ways that you maybe never thought you could be, but feel so good.
Yeah, that's beautiful, by the way. Sweet daughter.
Yeah. Oh, that
Like,
was a moment.
yes, our emotional pain is something we explore in shadow work. And I feel like that's one of the bigger conceptions of it on a grander scale, but it's not the full range of possibility. Shadow work can help us heal from shame and trauma and betrayal, but it also teaches us how to communicate more effectively, how to find our hidden talents and aspirations and positive traits, how to give and receive forgiveness, and build that resilience over the course of our lives, and reclaiming all that hidden gold that we've buried deep within us.
Hi, Michael here. Hey, seriously, thank you for listening and engaging the Inner Work Community podcast. I trust today's episode gave you something to reflect on or illuminated a new trailhead to your hidden life. If this episode resonated with you, you can subscribe, share it with your people, and leave a review. That really helps spread the word and boost our online presence in this digital world. Remember, growth is not a straight line, and we're all figuring it out as we go. I'm grateful to be in this unfolding and excavating work with you. So, until next time, be yourself. You've got a good self. And remember, it's all a gift.